own Michael Richardson, who joins us on the desk with another update. And I know last night we were pretty busy, but we're still talking election headquarters today.
Absolutely. The elections never stop, right? There's going to be one on May 26th, so we got that to look forward to. But Kylie, thank you for having me here on the desk. I was able to speak with Dr. Ken Wink from UT Tyler about last night's results. Now, last night, the big contest, the ones with the most eyeballs on them, were the Senate races in particular, both on the Republican side and the Democratic side. Of course, on the Democratic side, State Representative James Tallarico ultimately won over Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, avoiding a runoff because he got over 50%. However, on the Republican side, there is going to be a runoff between Attorney General Ken Paxton and incumbent Senator John Cornyn. And as Leo talked about earlier, President Trump indicated on social media that he will soon be making an endorsement in that race. And that's been a big question. Will the president make an endorsement, and how could that impact the race? So I was able to speak with Dr. Ken Wink before the news about the social media post from President Trump. He talks about the Senate race and a whole lot more.
All right, well, let's take a listen here.
Let's talk about last night's primary. What stood out to you the most from the results?
Yeah, well, obviously there's a pretty exciting Senate race. On the Democratic side, it's over for now. On the Republican side, it's not over for now. We'll have to do it again in May.
And what stood out? You call it an exciting Senate race.
Sure.
What makes you want to call it that?
You know, I think in both of those races, what we see is the factions of both parties. We see sort of the conservative MAGA Republicans versus the more moderate so-called mainstream Republicans, and we see, I think, the more moderate Democrats versus the more progressive Democrats. And it's interesting how those dynamics played out last night.
Talk to me about what stood out to you from the results in East Texas specifically when it came to either the Senate race or some other races.
We know Jasmine Crockett did very well in East Texas. That's very heavily African-American population, no big surprise there. Interesting on the Republican side, Cornyn did well in Smith County, but in the more rural areas of East Texas, Paxton did better. So,
why do you think that is?
Well, I think rural East Texas is very, very conservative. That is MAGA country. I think maybe Smith County is a little bit more open to sort of the old school, traditional conservative argument. And Cornyn's been pretty popular in the state for a long time now.
Was there, whether it be the Democrat or the Republican side, was there one that particularly surprised you more on the Senate side?
Sure. The big surprise to me was on the Democratic side. I think the Republican side went almost exactly as we predicted in our polling at UT Tyler. I think what happened on the Democratic side is there was a late surge by Tallarico. And what we saw is our polling, which was about 2 weeks out from when we were in the field last night, and polling that was done earlier than us by UT Austin and University of Houston, we all showed Crockett in the lead. But more recent polling that came out in the last week showed Tallarico in the lead. So I really think if you look at the whole body of polling research, there was a genuine shift toward Tallarico the last week of the campaign.
And there's been a lot of talk about if Attorney General Paxton is the Republican nominee actually, let me ask you this first. There's been a lot of talk that more money is going to be poured into the state as a result of there being a runoff on the Republican side.
That's probably true.
What could that mean for the candidates in the runoff and also potentially heading into November?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the Cornyn people certainly will be able to raise some money, and maybe the Paxton people will too. It's going to make consultants very wealthy over the next 2 months. But I don't think that's going to be the real difference maker. I think the difference maker in the runoff primary on the Republican side is turnout, and who turns out and who doesn't. Will the Wesley Hunt people turn out? Our polling showed that they would, as a second choice candidate, they would favor Paxton over Cornyn, which is not a big surprise. But will they turn out with Wesley Hunt not on the ballot? And I think the other big question mark is, will President Trump make an endorsement? I think that could be decisive because I think this is shaping up to be a very close runoff election.
Do you predict President Trump will make an endorsement in the Senate race?
I cannot make that prediction. I've heard rumors that it's being considered. Uh, I suspect, given last night's results, it would probably be for Cornyn, but you never can tell what the president's going to do. Only he knows for sure.
And why do you predict it would be for Senator Cornyn?
Well, I think that's the conventional wisdom is that's the safer bet of the two. Paxton people, what we found is Paxton supporters really thought Paxton was the better candidate, regardless of who won on the Democratic side. But given that the moderate won on the Democratic side, it might be a little bit risky if you go for the really conservative candidate on the Republican side.
And you mentioned turnout, and in yesterday's results, there were over 2 million ballots cast in both the Republican and Democrat Senate contest.
That's right.
What do you think that means?
Well, you know, it's interesting. We saw that early voting totals were really, really high. The rates of participation were much higher for the Democrats than normally. That's both in Smith County and in the state as a whole. And you most of the time in these primaries, you do not see as many votes cast for the Democrats as for the Republicans, but you see that has happened in our big races today. So I think that should give the Democrats some confidence in their ability to compete in November.
Let's talk about November. A Democrat has not won statewide in Texas in decades.
Right?
How could last night's results, impact the general election? Could we see a Democrat win statewide here this year?
Well, I think the best chance for the Democrats is, in fact, in the Senate race. Keep in mind, as you pointed out, I think it's been 30 years or so since Democrats won a statewide race. And our polling still indicates that all things being equal, Republicans have a 6 to 8 point advantage in terms of party identification, and people vote on the basis of party identification. But Tallarico certainly exceeded expectations. He has the ability to raise money. He had a high turnout, a lot of votes. He won last night. So I think he has momentum. He also has the advantage of he can begin to court Crockett's supporters today, whereas Cornyn and Paxton will still be fighting it out for 2 more months. That gives the Democrats a 2-month advantage in that race of burying the hatchet with the other faction and getting everybody on board for the November race.
Were there any issues that were discussed, over the course of the campaign that stood out to you that may have been a decisive factor for voters?
I don't really think so. What we found in our polling is that the economy was the #1 issue on people's minds, particularly inflation. That's a big shift from what we've seen in Texas over the last couple of years. It used to be border security. Border security is a distant second now. It's all about the economy, and even some Republicans are not very happy with the state of the economy right now. Now, our polling indicated that the person who was hit most by that fact is, in fact, President Trump. We still see Governor Abbott's favorables very high, and Dan Patrick's favorables pretty high as well. But certainly the Senate race is going to be wrapped up into what's going on nationally between the two parties.
Yeah, let me ask you, going off of that, how much of a factor did President Trump play, in your view, in yesterday's primaries?
Well, let me put it to you like this. He is a polarizing figure. He motivates his base to turn out. He also motivates his opponents to turn out. And I think part of what happened, I think 2 things happened that explained high Democratic turnout yesterday, and that in fact in early voting as well. And one is the national anti-Trump message, I think, is resounding all over the country. Secondly, though, I think you had some very close and important races. Those you know, the Attorney General's race had three viable candidates on the Democratic side, and we knew that the Crockett Tallarico race was going to be very close. You know, why would you go out and vote in primaries if there's really nothing to decide? So I think both the anti-Trump messaging from the national Democrats as well as the close contest explained the Democratic turnout.
And we've talking about the Senate race a lot to this point. Any other results from yesterday that stood out to you?
Well, I was a little bit surprised in both of the AG races. I thought both of those races would be a little closer. We know for a fact that there is going to be a runoff primary on the Republican side. I was a little surprised that Middleton ran so far ahead of Roy that he did. He is getting the MAGA base for sure. That was certainly true in East Texas. I was also surprised at the gap between Johnson and Jaworski on the Democratic side. Thought that would be a little bit closer, and there is still some question about the results on that, but I don't think I think there will be a runoff. I think the question is who's going to come in second. There's only a few tens of thousands of votes between Joe Jaworski, who's running second, and Anthony Box, who's running third, so we'll have to wait. I think 93% of those votes are counted. We'll have to see, count the rest and see who's going to be in the runoff.
So what are you expecting heading into November?
Well, who knows what to expect. There certainly will be some foreign policy issues that will come up. We didn't expect conflict with Iran before last week. I think there'll be other things that come up both domestically and as far as foreign policy is concerned. The Republicans are going to have to do a better job of messaging on the economy, I think. I think Trump is attempting to do that in his public statements, certainly in the State of the Union, but candidates have to also remind voters of what it was like during the Biden years and that things are in fact better. Voters seem to not be aware of that or not agree with that. So it's a messaging issue for the Republicans, I think.
Is there anything I didn't ask you that you would like to add?
Well, you know, one more thing that we found in our polling is that Texans, at least, still value border security, and they give Abbott high marks for what he's done. But they are a little bit more skeptical of ICE detentions in cities all over the country. So for me, it's a question of overreach by the administration. I think if the Trump people and Republicans across the country can say, hey, we've done a great job on the border, it's far more secure now than it ever was, and maybe back off a little bit on the ICE arrest, that may work to the Republicans' advantage in November. It's certainly an issue for the Democrats.
All right, everybody. And if you want to know more on this story, you can head on over to our website, but it will also be in our 6 p.m. newscast. That's where you can catch more